Guys ready?
Yeah.
All right. Instructions on exiting the building in the event of an emergency. Paul just did the visual. Get out the door. That door go left, that door go right. Agenda additions, deletions, or changes in order of agenda items. Oh, hearing none, we'll move on. Open to the public for items not related to the agenda. Do we have anybody? I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses. Do we have anybody online? No.
Sue.
Sue, no, but no members of the public. No.
Can she hear us?
Yep.
She can. We already
Yep.
tested that.
It's one of the first things we do. Announcements and staff report. Any commissioner announcements?
Yes. The council last night approved.
Michael, can you turn on your mic so Sue can hear?
The council last night approved the conservation easement for the Wheeler Nature Park. Which was great news because it's been a long time in coming.
Staff?
Lots of things going on. We are making substantial headway on permit software that's going to be used by various different departments in the city to make it easier for folks to do their fire department permits, their clerks permits, their public works permits, their planning permits. So we're really excited about that. It's a big in the background work, but it is proceeding. And you've probably seen that construction has started on a addition to the DoubleTree Hotel on Williston Road, if you've been across the interstate over there. So that's going to be a 4-story, essentially new building, but it's going to be connected by a sky bridge over to the existing hotel, and that is part of the form-based code district, which I believe makes it the 20th new building built, being built in the form-based code.
Also, DoubleTree is the one on Williston Road.
The DoubleTree used to be the one on Williston Road. Well, it is still on Williston Road, but it's on Williston Road where the Sheridan
Oh, yeah.
Used to be the
used to
Sheridan.
be the
forever.
Sheridan.
Yeah.
Yep. With the Sheraton and the Hilton. Well,
Colin has joined online just for commissioners.
Okay. All right, then we're on to number 5, LDR amendments. Receive changes made by city council pursuant to 24 BSA, blah, 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 and update planning commission report as needed. So this, I think, Kelsey, if you want to help me out with this pretty much just verifies what the changes.
Yeah, so after the planning commission finished your work on the LDR amendments, the city council had a few additional changes that they wanted to see. So there's a few changes in language, and we felt that it required a little bit of change, a little bit of tweaking to the reports that the planning commission approves and sends to the state.
And this incorporates the discussion that you all had about the reserving space in the master plan. The language is a little bit different from what you had seen, because Kelsey had the opportunity to spend a little more time with it, but functionally it's the same. So, but it does, because of that addition, we thought that it made sense to update the report to reflect that.
Okay. Everybody read it?
yes,
Everybody was good with it?
I've read it.
Yeah.
Are we ready to move on it?
Yeah, if
Well,
we,
I'll make the motion. I move to approve the planning commission report for proposed amendments to the land development regulations LD 24-06 as presented in this week's packet, and to find that the previously approved reports for amendments LDR 2401 through 2405 and 2407 through 2410 do not require any modification to account for the changes made to the draft bylaws made by the city council on October the 7th, 2024. Do I have a second?
do we have a second? Paul?
Yep.
Yep. All right, we have a second. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I
I believe that was unanimous.
All right, so the council's second public hearing and possible action will be on November 4th.
Okay. Number 6, equity in planning outreach presentation on framework.
Give me just a second to get organized.
Are you doing that, Kelsey?
I
Are
am.
you the presenter?
I am in fact the presenter. You sound disappointed.
Take that.
Ah,
You're not Andy, though.
I am not Andy.
We know that.
All right, so I do have it up on the screen and in on the confidence monitors in front of you. You also have these slides in your packet, so you would have seen them, but they are designed to be presented live, so they don't have every detail that they would have otherwise had. So the Planning Commission is familiar with this project. This is something that you moved forward and well, the staff had suggested in 2022. And we had applied for a municipal planning grant to get funding from the state to develop a framework, a toolkit for better equity in planning outreach. The idea being that we have been doing our best and we've been, making good efforts, but without the guidance of a structure. It was hard to maintain best practices. It was hard to scale engagement for individual projects. It was hard to target the people who were most affected in the city, and to be doing all of that work equitably and effectively for the city. So we reached out to a consultant. We put out an RFP for consultants, and we ended up hiring one named Civic Brand, and they've been working with us to develop this toolkit. This presentation, just for the council or for the commission's information, is informational at this point. It's your opportunity to ask some questions. It is not a finished toolkit. We have further meetings with Civic Brand in the next week or so, and are hoping to have a finished toolkit in November that we are already starting to roll out some of the recommendations, which is also where the things like the project charges, the ideas for some of those kinds of things are coming from. But we are also intending to use this toolkit in the early stages of new projects that are coming through, like the Parks and Open Space Master Plan is just starting now. And if we can incorporate some of these ideas even before the toolkit is fully finished, we would love to be able to start doing that. And we've been starting doing a little bit of that work. So just starting at the highest level, some of this is repetitive, but just making sure everybody's on the same page, repetitive to other meetings that the commission has had, not, internally to itself. Project goals. The key goal is to advance equity in city government, which is a key principle of City Plan 2024. This is something that we see as really setting a framework, starting with planning and with the Planning Commission and with planning and zoning projects, but then from there, building out the expectation in the public, building out the framework within city government in different departments and in different committees and commissions and council to be doing this kind of work for large projects across the city. This includes reframing the city's approach to outreach. We are hoping that this is moving towards giving all people equivalent value and avoiding valuing some input types, timings of input, or voices over others. There is unconscious or subconscious recency bias often, like the most recent opinion you heard is often something that you remember the most. There's also a frequency bias that's something that you hear the most times over time you may consider to be the most important. And we're hoping that establishing this kind of framework allows people who are not the most frequent and aren't the most recent to be valued in decision-making a little bit more than currently. And to do this, we want to build a predictable, transparent system. In response to something that a commissioner said at a previous meeting, transparent is not inferring or implying that the city has not been operating in public and hasn't been transparent up to now. But adding predictability and adding these structures where people know if something is happening that matters to me, I'll find out about it through this channel or on the website, or I'll have more expectation that I am fully informed. That always is a good thing. And being able to build better structures to do that predictably is a goal of this project. And all of this is to reach people that traditional outreach often fails to reach. We've talked about this before in the past. The traditional Tuesday, weeknight meeting is not going to work for everybody for many reasons. So using this to channel some of the work we've been trying to do with other, other times of the week, other days of the week, other times of day, online polling, meetings in places that are not City Hall, trying to do all those things, but do them in a more structured way that is efficient and predictable.
Technical solutions to enable us to reach the entire population of South Burlington?
By technical, do you mean like technological? Like,
Yes, I mean, for example, I mean, it's a big thing, but say you could use the grand list to
mhm.
to contact every landowner or property owner in South Burlington. I mean,
So you
it's a big
could,
list.
yeah, you could, and it is a big list. The idea of this project is that kind of outreach is not going to be strictly necessary for all projects, and to be able to thoughtfully deploy our resources in ways where, every crosswalk feasibility study doesn't result in a postcard mailing to everybody on the grand list.
No.
Trying to be more targeted about how people engage and how to reach people that are less likely to kind of come to us is the target of some of this.
I'm thinking of the folks down who have the pet.
Mhm.
They complained that they never saw. So obviously, landowners would be interested in knowing if there's going to be a change to LDRs. Obviously, not every other thing,
Yep.
but those are the things that we might want to get out to everybody. It doesn't get
Yep.
to.
Yeah, and I would say that is absolutely, there will be projects that are at that far end of the spectrum that we want to reach as many of the 20,000 people as possible. And so it would be sort of wide carpeting of reaching everybody. And then there's going to be projects that aren't that necessarily. So using this framework and the toolkit that we're developing to make those decisions instead of just thinking, oh, I need to do that, reach everybody end of the spectrum to be doing good outreach for every single project, is just not going to be possible. So this is figuring out where a project falls on that scale. And then finally, to incorporate a feedback loop into outreach, something that we've heard in the past and something that is a best practice in good public outreach and public communication is not just asking for feedback and receiving that feedback, but communicating back to the people, especially the people who are most affected, what happened to that feedback. So, the decision-making went through this and this process, and then we sent an email back out to everybody who was interviewed at the early process. Or we, in some projects, maybe you email everybody or you send a mailer to everybody, but really building trust and building, not necessarily listening to everything that any person says, because that's not going to be possible. But making sure that people feel valued when they spend their time to provide feedback is important in building public trust. So this is the really big picture. This project is kind of the rust brown colored triangle at the bottom. And it is a small piece that we're going to build on from here. Building the structure, starting with this equity and planning outreach project, leads to a more equitable approach to city decision-making, leads to equity in city government. So this is a small piece of a much larger puzzle that will be decades of work and truly doesn't actually end. So just working through a little bit of what's been going on, building the toolkit. This project began over the winter and then started really kicking off in the spring. We asked for input from staff from city departments who interact with different people, different members of the public, different people who are community builders in different spaces for different reasons, to join a community advisory group. So these are people who are in religious communities, who work at the high school, who are involved in youth sports, who are BIPOC residents, who work with low to no income housing residents, and really using the community advisory group as people who could relay some of the perspectives of further groups of people, not represent them, but provide some perspective of the people that they know in South Burlington. So we there were 7 or 8 people. There was a couple of people who came and went, but 7 or 8 people in that group who helped guide Civic Brand's work on this.
How many, how big is that group? How many people?
7 or 8 individuals.
Just describe who they.
Yeah, so we had people who work at CHT, we have people who work at the high school, someone involved in youth basketball, someone who is involved in faith-based leadership and nonprofit work and also higher education. People who are involved in Temple Sinai. Someone who's just a well-known, well-connected, retired social worker in the city
State rep.
and former state rep. Now I'm on the spot, but I was thinking if I forgot anybody. I think that's it.
What about me?
I forgot. You weren't in the group. And so we set up that group and used them throughout the process to populate some of these other things. So we had a public survey that was sent out through things like City News and the website, intended to reach anybody and everybody who wanted to respond. But Civic Brand also came and was present here in person in July and conducted interviews and focus groups and pop-up events. The pop-up events were paired with recreation events, like Department of Rec events that they were holding over the summer during that, few days that they were here. And then the focus groups and interviews were people who were identified by either city staff or by members of the community advisory group as people that were would likely be willing to talk to them, but also were a further representative of additional groups of people. So we got some feedback from the library about some of their library patrons who maybe are new Americans who might be interested. They talked to a small business owner who also is a BIPOC resident. So they did some of this additional work while they were here in July.
The pop-up events were the beer in the park kind of thing?
It was like that, but it wasn't at those events. It was a different sort of snack. There was kind of snacks in the park events in July. This was earlier than the beer events. It wasn't at the same.
And it was specified that it would be about this subject.
No.
Oh.
No, it's people who were coming for the recreation event. So they ended up, interacting with 30 or 40 people who were coming for recreation, but were also available. They sort of wandered around and
Audience.
Yeah, talked to people who were there who had come for other reasons. So moving a little bit into the actual framework, there's 4 real pillars of the toolkit. And as I said, this isn't finished, so a lot of detail is not fully fleshed out yet. But we have principles, guidelines, and best practices. These are the things that they're pulling from their knowledge, the consultant's knowledge and study of best practices nationwide. What are other cities doing? How is it going? What is the sort of social science study behind some of this? And pulling that into a context that makes sense for South Burlington. I'll skip engagement types for a second. Community partners is building that network of our community partner organizations. So that includes the schools, but it also includes the Howard Center, it includes sports leagues, includes religious societies, it includes nonprofits that are maybe region-wide or are based out of Burlington, but have significant populations they serve in South Burlington. And the intention is that keeping communication going and doing a good job on that feedback loop about where did your contribution go and how was the decision made, builds those networks. So it's not like we reach out and we say, hi, can you tell us what you think? And they'll be less likely to do that if we haven't talked to them for 3 years or something, just when we need something. Really building this framework that we can reach more people through community partner organizations than we can on our own. The checklist, yeah, Donna.
Is one of those groups like AARP? Because I'm always sort of having trouble defining like what they are, because they're kind of an advocacy group. So they sort of speak for what they think seniors need.
Yeah,
They're not necessarily they're not necessarily the voice of seniors.
No, this is more local than that. This isn't the sort of national organizations. It's things like the Howard Center, CHT, the Food Shelf, the Senior Center here is a sort of a local thing that reaches seniors. So things that are more operating at a local level. Yeah.
Rotary,
Yeah.
South Burlington Land Trust.
These are all building the list. So these are not necessarily people who have been reached out to, but yes, those are organizations that would be the right examples. And then the checklist, templates, and other resources is really the nuts and bolts of how do we do this every day? You know, how do we make sure that we're following our best practices? How do we make sure that we're following the same decision tree every time and making our decisions about how much outreach or who we target with outreach and how do we reach them? So that this process is not something that we just do and they write a report. It's a functioning toolkit that we would be using when we're setting up any project. So then, yeah, Donna.
I'm just imagining how that works, because I think in the past, or what we currently still do, so you have public meetings and people come and offer their opinions
Mhm.
On various topics. And then you probably have outreach that happens simultaneously with that. And how do you combine that? You know, it's like, because sometimes, I mean, the people who show up, like you mentioned, the land trust, they always show up, overrepresented, I think, in terms of
Mhm.
what the opinion of most people are. A lot of people agree with it. But as an organization, they show up. And there's a lot of organizations that people do not show up. So how do you meld that?
Yeah, so I think what's important, and we'll get into it a little bit later, is that this toolkit really recognizes that certain types of people will show up for traditional feedback opportunities and others won't, for various motivations, because of various barriers, all sorts of things. So this is really building how do we get feedback from different groups of people, and to not necessarily have it be the loudest people or the most frequent people who are, yeah. So it's, maybe you have a survey response that came in 6 months before the end before the decision was made. That is as valuable as someone who comes in later. So really trying to set up a structure where you balance people who respond in different ways and incorporate it into decision making.
I think you're going to talk about this in a minute, but one of the subject areas that that our consultant brought to us to consider is to look at feedback from the perspective of a viewpoint having been identified. So that might be 100 people, or it might be 2 people. The numbers might, in some cases, not necessarily be as important early in a project as a perspective having been shared. So 2 people describing that going over a bridge at night that's dark, it felt like an unsafe circumstance. You may not need 50 more people to say that same thing to identify that viewpoint. The viewpoint's been identified. And so the work that staff and you will have is to say, have the viewpoints been found, and then bring that to the solutions to whatever that project is. Does that make some sense about the sort of thinking about? Right. And
20 different considerations. Somehow you have to learn to wait.
Oh, you would turn your mic on, please.
Oh, I'm sorry,
go
because some
ahead.
of them may not be consistent, or, they may even oppose. Some ideas may not be in opposition to others,
Right.
and so waiting
And
those.
I think the starting point of this project is that I think we're all aware that there's entire viewpoints that we're not hearing at all in our community.
Sure.
And so that's sort of the starting point. So I know you're going to cover more of that later, but
Yeah, so the last pillar of this is the engagement types. And this is, I'll just skip to the next slide and talk about it here. So what's a lot of the work that Civic Brand has currently been doing is identifying the engagement types. They see it as life stage and barriers and motivations. So with working with the community advisory group, Civic Brand identified that there are really 4 life stages of people. It's generally age-based, but with a little variation. about where people are in their lives and that would affect how they tend to engage. So high school students are different from adults. And adults with kids are different from adults without kids. For obviously, people without kids are not going to be able to get information easily through the school system, things like that. And seniors. And so this is not saying that these people have different interests or different priorities. This is saying that people in those four groups may use different communication strategies and are reached more easily using different channels. So then they also identified 4 categories of barriers to providing feedback, and they had identified 43 barriers that fall into those categories. So those categories were cultural, social, physical, or accessibility, language, and resources. And then they also,
What do you mean by, what is resource?
like they don't have money to buy bus fare to get to the city, so they might, respond better through a different channel. Yeah. And then unique motivation. So there's things that can stop someone from participating in public outreach, and there are things that would motivate you to participate in public outreach. It's sort of the negative and the positive of the same thing. So they identified 7 categories and then 36 individual motivations. Personal fulfillment, community and social factors, practical and strategic, civil, moral, and ethical values, cultural and community specific, and personal interests and enjoyment, and contextual. These are things like, maybe I'm motivated to go to a presentation about the city budget because I'm really concerned about my tax bill right now. That's one motivation. Versus I want to go to a presentation about the city budget because I don't want recreational programs for my kids to be cut. So that's being motivated by sort of programs and by your kids and for the future. Or maybe you want to go to the budget presentation because you want to make sure that enough money is allocated to climate change mitigation. And that is being motivated by something else completely. So there are reasons that people choose to use their time to participate in public outreach. And those can be unique as well. So looking at all of these categories, they said there are 6,192 possible unique combinations. Obviously, that's impossible for us to tailor outreach to each of those 6,000 plus unique combinations. So what they did from there was ask this question: does the unique combination impact how they engage? So if the answer is yes, they're an engagement type and they would develop a profile. Or if the answer is no, we can reach them through our community partners and through sort of general outreach. So if you fall into the yes category here, what it really means is you might be one of those 6,000, your personal experience is one of the 6,000 that is the same as maybe 500 others, because you prefer to hear about city happenings through the e-newsletter, and you prefer to respond with a online survey because you can't come to a city hall meeting in person for whatever reason that might be. And you're super motivated by your values. So you may have a combination of those things that all run into that same combination, that we can reach you through the e-newsletter. We can motivate you by explaining how it impacts, how it plays to your values, pro or con. And we can remove barriers by having something like a public survey available online. So using the toolkit, how does this actually work? So the important things are meeting people where they are, overcoming their barriers, and motivating them to engage. And that follows that sort of previous 3 sections, three factors. So this is where we involve the best practices in all of these things, but then also people's preferences, what prevents them from engaging, and what motivates them to engage.
When it comes to planning commission related and, the types they deal with, you realize that they do affect people.
Oh, yeah.
They don't know that it's going to affect them because it's dense. It's kind of dense material. And Like you asked for public comment on changes to the LDRs. You know,
Well, and this
nobody's
is,
gonna look at that stuff
yeah,
fence and you wouldn't know where to begin.
yeah.
So,
So just as an example, the part of what the motivation for doing this project charge option is one side of it is making sure the commission is focusing on what you've decided to focus on and answering the questions that have been asked. But the other is that someone preparing a document at the beginning of a project that is more accessible to people. They don't need to be able to read the LDRs and read like the specific lines of, you know, section B1 little a Romanet 4 or whatever it is, and comment on that, but they can comment on what the project is supposed to be and what the outcomes are going to be. So it's some of these things of not necessarily always having people that need to be able to respond to very specific LDR changes that result at the end of a project. Maybe it's reaching people at the beginning of a project when everything is still more in a conceptual state of, do we want to do something or not? Do we want to regulate something in this way or not? And that will vary a lot by different projects.
well, yeah, because a green project is gonna have more public input likely because people kind of imagine what a town green looks like.
Sure,
Density and I
sure.
mean, building height issues, I think you might get a lot more negative feedback just because people imagine the worst. You know, when you start talking about building height, oh, it's gonna shadow my house, you know, it's like, this is gonna be horrible. It's gonna be canyons and everything like that. So I think without having real life examples, most people, it's very difficult to solicit feedback.
Well, I think the intention of this, and I'll get into this actually on this slide, is setting up public outreach really early in a process is going, especially with something like the parks master plan that's kicking off. Asking people for their feedback at the early conceptual level is going to be really critical. What has happened traditionally is you more have, hi, we've worked for 6 months on this project. Here's the LDR amendments and the red line of it. Can we have your feedback on it? That's not as accessible. But maybe if we talked to people up at this beginning stage about the actual concept and this, that, or the other thing, it won't be too technical, even for things that end up being really technical on the end of the project. If
So
we can talk about
you
early.
use the project charge.
Yeah.
That first outreach.
That's the intention. And again, it will vary by project. Some projects won't need that kind of outreach at the beginning, but some definitely will. So
And,
here
yeah.
there's, oh, sorry, Colin.
Yeah, I guess this to add to what Don was saying about density of stuff. I have been absolutely shocked by how many times I've been telling friends who say, "Oh, I'm on the planning commission, kind of working on like land use regulations and zoning." The number of times for friends I've just gotten a reply of, "What's that? What's zoning?" Like, it's sort of funny. It's easy. I find it very. I guess I take it very easy to granted, but like, I am very surprised to find the number of people that don't know, like, different areas of the city have different regulations on them.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people, I think in particular, I seem to notice it's people that don't own houses because they haven't butted up against land development regulations personally. But I think for a lot of people who are landowners, there are people who don't even understand or won't even exist, which I found could potentially be a definite barrier because you're going to have a bias to people that know that it exists versus are completely unaware of it at all. But yeah, just a comment.
Yeah, that absolutely. And the idea is that over time, when we build a predictable framework for this, that people, the level of understanding in the public will hopefully go up over time. If you're hearing the same things and if things are being explained in plain language, and you can rely on hearing about changes in regulations or a project that's happening, or the Department of Public Works is scoping a sidewalk or something, and you hear about it through, you know, your recreational sports team or through your church or through a nonprofit that you are a patron of. Being able to build those things by keeping that presence more constant, I think is part of that educational process.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So here we have stage 0 through stage 3 of public outreach and for how to operate in a project. I would say traditionally South Burlington has actually done a pretty good job about stages 1 and 2. So doing some engagement, starting some engagement for a project, and then answering a specific question or solving a specific problem. Framing a specific question, like when there was ARPA money and the city wanted feedback from the public about how they thought the ARPA money should be spent. They did public meetings, they did a survey, like they've done some engagement and they were answering a question. I think that is the core that has been done reasonably well. Stage 0 and stage 3 on this chart is where South Burlington and most communities have traditionally fallen a little bit short. So stage 0 is really at the beginning of a project, identifying who is impacted the most. Who do we not traditionally hear from that we would want to hear from? We would want to hear viewpoints from, not necessarily like 43% of the whoever people are, think this thing or that thing. It's not that kind of thing, but hearing some feedback from at the beginning. And then at what level of engagement we want that is required for this project. And I'll explain that more on the next slide. So being really intentional at the beginning of a project of identifying who's impacted. And that's where we get to what Michael said about, changes in the LDRs that impacted Heinsberg Road could in the future be targeted to landowners in the areas where the districts would change or something like that. Or where the areas that are being discussed could be identified at the beginning of the project to be able to provide early feedback. Yeah.
So Kelsey, I just thought thinking about the project charge that you guys are working on.
Yeah.
And there's different things that you list what the project is and stuff. I just thought about this. Is this something that I don't remember seeing this in the project charge? Is this
It's
a
not.
category that would saying this is who would be affected?
It definitely could. The project charge is bringing in some of these principles, but definitely not all of them. We don't have the final toolkit from Civic Brand, but we have been taking some of the lessons we've already learned from the project and doing some things like this. So the way that the project charge is kind of taking baby steps towards a robust step 0 is identifying what committees that we wanted to work with further, asking specific questions and really identifying what is the scope of the project can help us identify what is the scope of the communities of people who may be affected differently. So the project charge is moving this direction, but it's definitely not close to being all the way there. So yes, I think that's something that, especially in bigger projects, it would be worthwhile for the city or for the commission, or whatever group in the city is using the toolkit to identify those groups of people by engagement type in that step 0 process.
Here's a question,
Mhm.
Especially about stage 0.
Mhm.
I'm just thinking about, if you had all kind of public engagement about, do we build an east-west highway crossing?
Mhm.
And if you really had engagements from everybody, would that project ever have happened?
Sure. It's not a vote.
Because a lot of people kind of came back afterwards and like, we don't want to spend money that way.
Well,
Money that way for, and because those people feel like they had it, there was a lot of public input. I agree
Mhm.
with that, but there were a lot of people who argued about how the money was being spent afterwards, never participated in any of that, because it was very, it was a project. Started out as a project. We have money to do this project and we're gonna go there. So I'm just I've heard a lot of public input about this type of toolkit and how it gets used. And a lot of this was at the, sort of the energy and, how do we spend money to get houses upgraded and things like that. Because it's super pertinent to that. I think other projects, when there's money for a certain thing, the input is a lot different, so I'm just saying that this toolkit may not work the same way for every kind of project.
absolutely. That's absolutely true. And I'll explain a little bit more in the next slide, but there's the required or desired level of engagement is an important part of step 0. So as I said, I'll explain that more on the next slide, but there is sort of a sliding level of how much public engagement is necessary or is desired for any given thing. And the other thing is to make very clear that this does not move the decision-making power from bodies like the Planning Commission or City Council to the public, majority vote kind of a situation. It's not saying we need to identify the people who are most impacted and whatever they say goes. It's the job of bodies like this and other bodies in the city to be making those decisions that are balancing different interests, that are paying attention to where grant funding is coming from, et cetera. So having more robust public engagement doesn't mean that the decision-making power is necessarily transferred to the public. It's just making sure that engagement is done in a way that you are reaching more of the people who are impacted and people who are maybe haven't been participating in public government up to now. So then
If this is a successful program,
Yeah.
we expect a lot more of our time to be taken with people who are interested in what we do, coming to listen and ask questions.
Yes and no, I would say. I think for certain groups of people, yes, and for other groups of people, no.
So if the answer is yes, it will be a mark of success.
I think it's not necessarily that the number of people who attend public meetings and come to ask questions increases would be either success or it wouldn't be a failure, but it wouldn't necessarily show success. But I think success would be having more people participate, so and provide unique viewpoints instead of not just a total, like say there's 100 more people who are involved in a certain process. If they're all presenting the same viewpoint, that's not necessarily success. If those 100 people are coming from 100 different perspectives and are providing all of that additional input, I think that's more of a success. And there's a sliding scale between those two things. I think that there is a good amount of work that's done on the staff end for this to really make sure that we are efficiently targeting people and reaching people and removing the barriers for participation. The more complicated thing is framing public outreach in a way that motivates people to engage. And that's going to be a long and iterative process. We're going to try things and, we might not get any change in the participation, but we see new people or we see different people. Or we might over time build the structures that, for the first year, you're not really getting a lot of change, but over time, people are starting to understand the predictable system of public outreach. Like every Sunday, my pastor at my church, says something about a project that is important to me or whatever it is. Like the ways that people are reached changes over time, and it's not just through the website or through public postings at City Hall.
I think the thing that I would add in terms of, where this relates to your workload, it may be hearing directly from more people. I think that the both time and also hard work that will be for us to provide to you and for you to consider is how do you take, if we are successful in getting many more viewpoints, many more perspectives shared, how do you take all that breadth of information to inform decisions that best serve the community as a whole, and taking the time to consider all of that and weigh that. I think that's where a big chunk of your work may be. It may be that people are directly in the audience, or it may be that you are weighing lots of different viewpoints. Using your example that you shared, Donna, of how ultimately this is all intended to serve effective decision-making for the community on behalf of the community.
We can expect that there'll be more staff time involved and more of our time, I would guess.
I'd say probably yes. but I am hoping, I think the hesitation is that engagement and outreach will be done more efficiently instead of scattershot. So in the past, when we've just been like, I don't know, let's do a survey and some meetings on Saturdays and I don't know what else, and maybe we'll throw in some pizzas or something, like that might have been just as much work, but not as effective. So stage 3 is, as I said, closing the loop and verifying solutions. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple of slides. So this is what I was alluding to before. This is the engagement spectrum. So from top to bottom, it is the least public engagement to the most public engagement. And by engagement in this particular slide, it means more than just information going out. It's a scale of how much involvement the public is expected to have in giving feedback and in actual decision making. So from the top, it's more of just providing the information to the public, making sure that we are providing it through the channels that are reaching the people that we want to reach, and through the community partners that are reaching the communities that are most impacted. Through the middle, it's a sliding scale, a bit of getting feedback from people, getting people to provide further feedback and ideas on drafts, all the way through to kind of collaborating with the public body to really go back and forth about alternatives and could we do this, more of a true collaboration. And then the very bottom is a shared decision making. That is when it gets a little more formal. These are things like an actual public vote for making certain decisions that slides all the way through from the top being just, we're letting you know, through to we're not going to do this unless the majority of the city says yes. So just talking a bit about, oh, and I should have said, this will vary a lot by project. So, you might have, this is part of what you need to identify in the step 0 is this something that we're doing, but we want the public to know about? Oh, we're restriping the lines in the parking lot behind City Hall. That doesn't require city feedback. That doesn't require public feedback, but we need the people who go to the senior center to know that that's happening, and then that parking lot will be closed. But then you get sort of into consult and involve on the spectrum. If it's, we're restriping the parking lot behind City Hall and we're changing the arrangement. We're changing the number of spaces. We're adding handicap spaces, or we're adding EV charging spaces or something else. Something's changing that we want some public feedback on. And sort of it goes from that, we're just letting you know, through. So the next thing that very first column in the toolkit that I showed was guidelines and best practices. This is some of the work that the Civic brand has been doing, gathering best practices nationwide and internationally. This is about defining your goals. So this is something that is happening in your step 0. So clearly defining the project purpose, clearly defining the engagement types and communities of people that are most impacted, and the required level of engagement from both any particularly impacted communities or people that you want to reach who are not necessarily the people who take a little more effort to reach, and targeted outreach, targeted communication. How many times can I say outreach? Targeted communication to get to versus from the city at large. So there might be things where we want just as many people as possible from as many sides of the city as possible. We want to do the community at large, but we recognize that certain groups of people are harder to reach. So we do need to spend a little more effort to get to those people who are, maybe it's high school students or something they're harder to get to, but they have important voices as part of the patchwork of the city as a whole. So this is a list of some of the best practices about making engagement accessible. And these are some of the things that I've already been talking about: providing multiple channels for engagement, using culturally relevant communication, hosting engagement opportunities in accessible locations, accessible meaning sort of physically accessible, like not up a bunch of stairs or something, but also accessible to people who travel by bus or who live on Shelburne Road, or whatever people's needs may be, or as we provide in this room, hearing support or something else. Offering flexible participation opportunities. That's related to providing multiple engagement channels, but this is recognizing that not everybody is going to be engaging in the same way based on their engagement type. And creating safe and inclusive spaces. I think that goes without saying and what the city has been doing for decades, but it's something that can always be improved, and to make people feel welcome in spaces. And some of that may be framing it as a community dinner plus a meeting or something, or it might be not having it in City Hall if City Hall is intimidating to certain groups of people for various reasons. Safe and inclusive in the bare minimum way, but also doing our best to build up the welcoming feeling of public outreach to reach more people. And then this is getting into that stage 3, closing the loop and maintaining communication. So through our best practices and through doing outreach through our community partners, providing project updates, general feedback, keeping people who are more generally interested and more generally impacted involved in the process. And then if there are specific engagement types who have been identified as being more impacted or have higher barriers or less motivation or whatever reason are harder to reach and are more core to the project decision making, making sure that we have an opportunity for verification, validation, and getting more specific feedback. So it may be something like the report from a certain, project, a study project, goes back to a group of people for their further feedback. It may be that a project has set up a task force style group that's made up of members of the public that represent different facets of our community, and they're working directly with staff or with a consultant to develop the report or to develop the recommendation for city council or whatever it is. Really making sure it's not just, hi, thanks for your feedback, and now it's going into a black box that you never see it again. It's, your feedback is valuable. This is how it's being engaged with in and incorporated into decision-making processes. Not necessarily that everything you say is going to be what happens. This is not saying you get the veto power over everything, but it's giving people the closing that loop and saying, you gave us feedback, here's what we did with it, here's the decision that was made, and here's the opportunity for further discussion if that's something that you need to continue on a certain topic. And here's just a few of those best practices for the feedback loop. Again, I've talked about some of these: maintaining constant presence and open dialogue to build trust and long-term relationships in those existing community networks, and providing clear and concrete follow-up. So this is all that stage 3 stuff that hasn't necessarily happened very well. So just going back to the toolkit framework, this is the core of it. This is reaching the people that we want to reach for different projects, really being intentional about how we reach people and who we are trying to reach at the beginning of a project, so that we're not stuck with just, as Donna said, like, here's 60 pages of LDRs, how about you just read them and let us know what you think, when it's not an accessible document to many people. And doing our work through trusted community partners, where people already have networks, either social or support, or at their place of work, or whatever it is, where they already trust groups of people instead of just the city coming in and saying, hi, can you do this for us? It's working with our community partners to build the trust throughout the community, and hopefully to get better feedback over time. And for people to feel like they are informed and have the opportunity to provide feedback on issues that will affect them. That's it. That's my big spiel about it. As I said, we're still working with Civic Brand to iron out the details of a lot of these things. So you'll be getting a more finalized draft of this toolkit in the coming weeks. And I would be pretty confident in saying before Thanksgiving. And then we can go from there about how we start factoring this in, how we start making decisions about using it. And it's not necessarily an all or nothing bucket. There's best practices in all of those stages, that 0 through 3, that can be used by anybody in the city to really strengthen the predictable framework of public outreach.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, Sue.
How do you deal with a situation where you have had people come in, they have given their opinions? I don't like this because it affects my kids, it affects my wallet or what. And the decision that is made is that they go ahead with whatever was being done. How do you deal with people who feel they've been betrayed by participating in the project?
So that's a good question, Sue. I think it's making sure that it's communicated up front, that it's looking for public feedback. As I've said a couple of times, it's not that members of the public have a veto power or decision. The public, unless you're at the very bottom of that engagement spectrum, it's not kind of co-decision making between the public and the members of the decision-making body. But also that clear follow-up of, you know, your feedback. Thank you very much for your feedback. We took it and we considered it at this open meeting and incorporated these changes, and we compromised on these couple of things, and really writing all of those things out clearly to outline sort of how did we get from A to B, and then providing further opportunity in the future for if you had additional feedback or you wanted to continue the conversation with staff or with someone else, to be able to continue that feedback loop. And
I think it should be clear that it's advisory
yeah, absolutely.
right up front.
Yep.
Well, and Sue, let me just add that, I think that the whole purpose of this is to continue to reinforce the strength and trust in decision-making in our community. As we become a larger community, as we become a more diverse community, we know that not everybody's going to agree on a variety of things, but are people given a opportunity to be not just listened to, but heard, and then have that feedback, have those perspectives be truly considered in the decision-making process. And that's not a thing that ends with one project. That's an ongoing, forever action of building trust in our community about how we make decisions. So I guess, that's sort of the big picture of this whole thing.
And well, one thing I feel is that reminds you of is that I think with the example of someone who is dissatisfied with the decision being made. I mean, of course, yeah, being upfront about what the means of participation is, but also I very much do go how you explain it. What giving a rationale for a decision, I think absolutely does go a long way. I remember in a past job, I was often in the position of responding to citizen requests to make various changes to the roads in their neighborhood. And a lot of the times the answer, frankly, most times the answer was no, but there was always a good reason for it. And it was always made clear that there was a letter going out to that person saying, we're not doing this, but here is the exact list of reasons why we're not doing that. And I think that was very much kind of a part making people understand that, we're not just saying no because we don't like you. We say no because we have these reasons that we are considering. And I think for a planning perspective, we have the city plan and stuff like that. We can cite good reasons why an alternative is considered. And I think that can go a long way too.
Yeah, and the other thing just to mention is that this is not just about, the city is doing a project and we're asking you for feedback. It's also about making sure that the people who are chosen for a task force represent different engagement types or different communities who are impacted, hoping or working towards that, also going past sort of an individual project's advisory group or task force, and it goes towards our committees and commissions, and really building that the public is the public government is representing a wider variety of the public as time goes on.
Just as a way of of really making sure that the framework works. I think it would be really a good idea to take like a specific real topic from the planning commission, maybe one from city council, take maybe 3 or 4 different topics and go through this and say, how does this work for this topic? Because again, I've seen these frameworks before. And in my mind, it's very helpful to work through a specific topic. Like, how would this benefit? How would, and I keep thinking about the building height. That's a good discussion we're going to get into. And that's a discussion that's going to affect a lot of people. And a lot of people are going to want to comment on that. And so how would this engagement process work for, say, someone who is in rental housing versus somebody who's a housing advocate that wants more housing, somebody who's in a suburban, ranch burger, somebody that's in a very large house with 5 acres, they're all going to have very, very different opinions about how building height is going to affect them. And so, I mean, I think without like testing it out on real topics, I think it strengthens a lot if the people who are creating this tool kind of use a real example to work through and we'll understand it better too. Because, sometimes this just seems like a lot of words, and putting it into, let me use this tool. How will that work? Makes it a little more effective. A lot more effective.
No, that's
Paul?
that's great feedback. Thank you.
Sorry.
So I have, I guess, 3 thoughts about this. The first thing that came to mind when you're talking about categories of individuals, I don't know what prompted me to think about it, but there are in our community and all communities opinion leaders who people look to for, Sandy Dooley on housing, Roseanne Greco on the environment. I mean, there are people who are our opinion leaders, and you don't want to use a system like this to minimize or limit them in their involvement in the city and their expression. I mean, they represent a lot of people. There are people for whom they are a voice. So you don't want to use a system like this to stifle those people at all. I mean, I think it was the issue of people are, there are a lot of people who do a lot of talking about a lot of stuff, blah, 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 I mean, that's good. It's like we should encourage more of that, not less of it, not like, okay, you get in line because we're concerned with equity here, and the first 99 people get to say what they want to say before you get to say what you want to say. I mean, it's like, you just don't want that to happen.
So Paul, what I'd say to that is I think that the purpose of this is to do exactly what you're saying, which is to build up community leaders. We know some of the community leaders, you named a few of them, but we have very little engagement with other people who are substantial leaders in their communities. They may just not know how to access city government.
Mm-hmm.
So they may be very much leaders for dozens or hundreds or more than that people, and we have not been connected to them yet, whether that's a homeowners association or a faith leader group or a neighborhood group or who knows. And I think that this is intended to, this doesn't stop with this project. This is really about building out those networks that will both connect us better to these leaders, and then hopefully over time have those leaders help bring more people into serving on committees and things like that. So we're yeah.
So I guess I would recommend talking to the opinion leaders themselves and asking them, how did you get involved, and why have you maintained the involvement, and how has that transpired for you? Because then you can tell these other people, you know, this is what happened. This is how it transpired that so-and-so became so-and-so, the spokesperson for whatever, you know.
And that's really a group of who this advisory group was. People who are leaders in their community. They may just not be engaged in zoning issues.
Okay. The other, a couple other things. One, I remember years ago, people were talking about hierarchical systems. So we've got to build a non-hierarchical system. Well, you know, I don't know, there really is such a thing as a non-hierarchical system, but there is an alternative to hierarchy. And that's called recursion. And recursion is, I don't know if you know the mathematical formula, but recursion basically is boxes inside of boxes, inside of boxes, inside of boxes, inside of boxes. So everyone's equal, but it just in a different size box on an infinite spectrum. So it takes a little to kind of, I mean, it takes me endless time to wrap my head around that, but that's how a lot of really good systems like this are built, is on recursion and on involving everybody, no matter what size box they are, in sharing equally in the opinion of whatever they think and contributing to the whole. And then finally, I think that your goal, rather than just engagement, should really be bottom-up decision-making, where the citizens make the decisions. I mean, ultimately, that's what democracy is. I mean, that's the famous old Greek democracy where there was, you know, direct participation in government. So, I mean, that's the kind of world you want to arrive at. That it's like a pure and real democratic world where literally the decisions are made from the bottom up, where everybody makes the decisions. My 2 or 3 cents.
Got to be careful about mob rules.
Well, I mean, the people who work on this and design these systems like that, that's exactly what they want to avoid. You know, I mean, they want to build a system that works where people don't feel like they have to be a part of a mob to get their voice heard, you know, where it's like open to them. You know, that's really the idea. And there are people that, you know, for a long time now, for 50 or 75 years, have worked on building these systems like this, you know. Corporations will do it, you know, in terms of, you know, the floor for the automobile business. You know, how do we build a better and, you know, more effective automobile? And they'll ask their workers how they do it, you know. So.
Well, thank you, Kelsey. That's good work, very important work. I think we all
It's a
agree on
great
that.
thing. I'm glad
Yeah.
the city's doing this.
I think it is. That brings us into our next thing, project charge. Couple things. I don't often get excited about planning. I said I don't often get excited about planning, but I am very happy to see something like this come out for a couple of reasons. And I think part of it goes back to what we were just talking about. Colin, you had a great point. If you just go up to somebody in the street and say, "Hey, do you know what the LDRs are?" 10 out of 10 people are going to be like, "What?" I think what this has the opportunity to do is to make what we're working on much more accessible to the public, which I think is a great thing. And I think that's part and parcel of what we were just talking about, is trying to make what we're doing much more accessible, much more open to the public. The other thing that's exciting to me is my hope is that with something like this, if we've done the work up front, it can make us much more focused in our work on a project. And hopefully the hope is that if we're much more focused, we can get a lot more done. And that's my sincere hope. So yes, I am excited about something in planning. So in terms of looking at these two project charges tonight, I think the best way to put it is what we're really looking for is input on what's essentially what we're doing is we're setting the table, but we're not going to eat the meal. So what we want to do is hopefully, I'm sure everybody read these, look at these, look at them from the perspective of, is everything we want in there? Is everything pertinent? Is there anything that's missing? Is there anything you don't agree with? So that we have the structure of the project charge correct, and then
Yep.
we can later launch into the project.
Yep.
So having laid that down, Kelsey, I don't know if there's anything you want to add about these?
No, I don't think so. I think that really sets it up as this is based on, this was written, these two, they're two different agenda items, but
Mhm.
they're two similar things. The two project charges were written based on the previous discussion that was had by the planning commission about what is the scope that you wanted to see for these two projects. What does it involve? What are the questions we're trying to answer? What are the city goals from the city plan that are involved in this? How does it connect to the policy priorities and strategies? So really laying out how does this puzzle piece fit into the big puzzle? So as Duncan said today, it's not the time to discuss the pros and cons of any particular policy related to the projects, but are these the parameters, or is this the box that these two projects fall into?
And then just to be clear, if you're ready, vote to approve the project charges
Yes,
as an
please.
action tonight.
All right.
I've,
Michael?
in the project description, I think it would fit with what follows.
Which one are you looking at? Supporting uses and primary? There's two that are similar. So
Why don't we start on the first?
Supporting uses.
Yep.
Yeah, let's start on the first one and we'll move to the second
Yep.
one afterwards.
That since it ties in with what's further down, that we should include mixed industrial, commercial, residential, because we do talk about residential further down in the project description. Include
those are just
residential.
those are the titles of the districts that are involved.
Yes. The mixed industrial, commercial and industrial open space are the two,
Yeah, the districts. Yeah.
but we should add residential. If we're going to do a project charge that involves possibly having residential or housing in commercial or industrial areas, then we should have it in the project description as
Isn't that why? I mean, it says housing goals in the last line there. I guess I interpreted that.
housing goals.
Yeah, it says it on the last line.
Yeah, I see it. But it's not. That's hard to balance. I just thought it should be included in that second line where we list the two zones.
What residential is not used in either of those zones in terms of the title of the zones.
Yes, but I'm suggesting that as part of this project charge, that's a proposal that I would make.
Where would you put it?
Where
We
would I
can't put it in, we can't add it to those because it's not part of, it's not the name of the zone.
Say that again?
We can't add it to either of those because it's not the name of the zones we're talking about. I mean, it's not part of it. Where would you put residential, Michael?
I would add residential to both of them.
But I think what
And
I'm trying to say is that on the second line, we're considering adding residential to both of them, maybe, but that's not the existing
Yeah.
conditions, and that's what's specified in the second line, is the existing condition.
Adding residential to mixed commercial, industrial and industrial open space. If you don't like it, it's not that important.
Well, Michael, so it says to evaluate what uses should be allowed in these areas to support their primarily commercial nature and how to balance city economic goals, housing goals, and transportation goals in this area. That for me, housing goals is residential.
Adequate.
I believe it is.
Just reinforced language.
All right.
Um,
Anything else? Well, no.
for down in the project purpose, scope and goals, we've got examine where employees are already located, where further growth in employment is possible. and what housing is located within walking distance. I would say, and what and where housing could be located in these zones, these two zones, add that. And then consider the potential for housing and compatibility of the intended characteristics of an area. I think when we talked about this before, we had the idea that we might designate where housing might be in an industrial open space area like Tech Park or Meadowlands.
Michael, what do you see as the distinction between what you're saying and what the final bullet that you just read off is saying? The final bullet on Where it
this,
says consider potential for
Yep.
housing and compatibility.
I just think we were talking before, or last time we discussed the idea of housing in commercial zones, that where that housing could be. So specify where it would be located within the zone.
So he's speaking geography.
Why
geographic.
would you need that kind of specificity? I mean, I think,
Because you don't want housing to be built in the whole, cover the whole industrial or commercial zone. You want
so
it
you're saying it's,
limited.
so you want to just define that it isn't a limited,
It's
a limited,
the area would be
portion.
defined, yes. Otherwise,
without saying exactly where that would be, because you don't want to put that kind of limit on land development where it may,
well, it's got to be
I
when
mean,
there's open space.
well, my interpretation is that you start with a site and then you figure out what works. That you can't just define from a planning sense where housing should go on any site without knowing the site.
Well, I think Michael's not speaking on a lot by lot basis, but he's speaking on an area by area basis.
Yeah.
Right.
So Michael, what about the next, if I'm understanding you correctly, the next bullet kind of addresses that.
Which one?
The bullet below the one you
Consider
just mentioned.
according-
Consider potential for housing compatibility. Doesn't that address that?
I would think that the last,
The
read
Yeah.
together with the last,
temporary accommodation should be located, might cover it.
And I'm sorry, what'd you say,
the
Kelsey?
last bullet is the actual sort of decision-making, realign districts to reflect changes in intended characteristics of the areas.
Yeah.
That's the actual, like, putting in the project scope that we may be moving district boundaries. And district boundaries is how you would identify an area that's different from another area.
Yeah, that bullet at the bottom of the page, where housing or temporary accommodation should be located, is probably adequate.
Okay.
Question of mine.
Is there a point that really looks at, because there was a very specific kind of housing that was requested by a specific company.
That's
And
what
yeah,
we've
it wasn't
characterized
even
as
permanent.
temporary accommodation.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily permanent housing, but are we saying that it could never be permanent housing? Because there might be cases where,
That's for you to discuss. over the
yeah,
course of this project.
because I think there's situations where, I think Colin brought this up before, that, certain people moving in for job-related purposes may be looking for temporary housing, but in the absence of other housing, it could become somewhat permanent.
I think the application the request you were thinking about was more for temporary.
It was, yeah.
Yes.
It was, but I'm just saying, I don't see that that's necessarily the only kind of housing that you could have in these zones.
I-
It depends a lot on those other uses, and are they compatible? Are
Well,
they
I had a
compatible with
question
housing?
about a legal or technical question. Since housing would be a new allowed use, if that's the case, can we specify the type of housing?
All to be determined.
I think you're starting to eat the meal, Michael.
Hmm?
You're starting to eat the meal. Step back. We're setting the table. Okay.
Yeah, well, I
Oh.
need to know whether we could, for example, say in these zones, the housing has to be affordable, for example.
Yeah. I mean, I think as written, that's absolutely within the scope here. I mean, I think this document isn't saying what we're going to do. This document is saying what's the scope of things we might do. And it doesn't say that's not part of the scope, I guess, put it that way.
I cannot understand.
Colin was saying that
Yeah, Colin.
is within, it isn't, he believes that, yes, that kind of question about type of housing or affordability of housing is within the broad scope of the bullets as listed.
I'm sorry.
The topic of, well, that Michael's raising about, can you regulate different types of housing or the affordability of housing or something like that, does fall within the parameters of how the scope is written for this project. It's not written out specifically, we will talk about this, but it falls into the general description.
Right.
That said, I would just say caveat, this is where we get into scope creep pretty quickly. So if you start saying, well, what if it was 2% different than what we do elsewhere in the city in terms of affordability, then you're opening up your entire question of affordable housing. So in broad swaths, yes. And also, we will work together to make sure that, the project is constrained to itself, because you could easily get into, well, what if this was, had a slightly higher standard for environmental requirements for, net zero buildings or whatever. And then it's all of a sudden, it's a question of a citywide question, not a one district question. So, yes, it's in the scope. And also, how we manage that scope is a together effort.
Okay.
Yeah, I also just want to put one bit of warning on what Michael just said. Saying that you could have only affordable housing in an industrial zone kind of smacks of,
Spot zoning.
spot zoning. Yeah, classism. Absolutely. I was like, hey, if somebody has a company and they want to build their mansion on top of their business, I would say go ahead. I don't think there should be any restriction on what kind of housing could be built. It's really up to the developer, or designer.
We'll find out when we get into engagement.
Well, and I think, when you're talking temporary housing by nature, that's going to be, I mean, it could be anything.
I wasn't specifically talking about temporary housing.
Yeah. But I mean, that case in particular, you could have temporary housing for, top-notch software developers, and they're going to want something pretty darn nice,
Yes. Well,
versus if you need assembly workers or something like that don't make a lot of money, that could be fairly basic kind of housing. So I'm kind of against putting a lot of, adding a lot of structure that's unnecessary on this.
are we good with the bullets then?
I'm good with them as written.
I'm sorry, Colin.
Sorry. I am good with them as written.
Okay. I am as well. I agree.
So one additional thing, just before you move on from this document is, we are recommending that there is a little bit of a tweak to the timeline. To have the drafting of changes to LDR language go January to March, and then the intended public hearing to fall in April or May. Just extending it, giving it a little more breathing room.
Fine by me.
Sorry, Colin.
Oh, fine by me.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No.
got my mic is broken, my normal one.
We also talked about regulating scale by scale.
That's in the next one.
That's in the next one.
Yeah.
These two projects definitely have overlap.
Mhm.
This one is focusing really on the supporting uses in these commercial and industrial areas, and the other is regulating of scale and different types of uses in buildings that are more in the mixed medium scale areas, but those things can definitely be incorporated in both. So you may be in a position where you want to extend some of the, change the districts over here. So as you said, Michael, where housing might be allowed actually becomes MSN or something. And then you get into the question of scale that's in the other project charge.
Okay. Are we good with the first one? Yep. All right, well, let's move on to the second.
So we'd like to see a motion on that.
Oh,
please.
you want to do them separately?
You've
There's
got
two
one that
agenda
you're all
items.
agreeing to, so
All right, hey,
yes.
okay, do I have a motion to approve this as written?
With the timeline adjustment.
Yes, with the timeline adjustment, yes, thank you.
Second, are you making a?
No, I'm asking, I'm
Oh,
asking if someone would like to make the motion.
yeah, I'll make the motion that this proposal be accepted as written.
Donna made the motion.
Oh.
Have a
I
second?
didn't have my microphone on.
We'll record it. Okay,
Second,
all right, Paul Engel second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye,
I
that is unanimous. All right, we are on to our second project charge, commercial uses and medium scale areas. Michael, this is the one you were just talking about. Yes, there is a lot of overlap between these two, but they are somewhat distinct.
They're regulatorily distinct and they are mostly topically distinct, but there are places where both of them could affect the same area of the city.
Okay. I did have one question here, and and again, it goes back to making it understandable for the public. The down under the bullets, consider if there's a scale of use and then consider if there's an impact of use. Can you just describe two of those scenarios for me so
Yeah,
to make it crystal clear as to what?
so you're talking about the sub bullets under the
Yes,
bullet
yes.
two,
If
yeah.
you can give me two scenarios with a scenario with each of those, just so I can.
Right, so a scale of use that's high impact regardless of other impacts, I would say something that is a 500,000 square foot building could be a very high impact regardless of what the use actually is, what they actually make, how many employees they have, but aesthetically it could be a really high impact. And an impact of an impact of use that is high impact regardless of scale. You could have something, this is going to be completely off the wall, but a charcoal manufacturer could produce a lot of smoke and smell and air quality issues if it's this big or if it's this big. So there are some things that the impact is tied to scale, the use and the scale are tied together. And there are other things where either the scale is so outsized that it has high impact regardless of the use. And there's things that the use is so outsized that it has high impact regardless of the scale.
Okay, thank you.
That would include environmental impact.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I think those are great examples. I guess I second what I think Duncan was also saying of, do we want to have some kind of example within the actual text of the document to sort of make that distinction clear, because it is a little unintuitive to me as well.
Was there any other feedback? Yeah, no, it read a little confusing.
Yeah.
For the.
Yeah, I was trying to identify that there are a lot of times where the scale of a use is more important than the actual use. And there's other times where the actual impacts from the use, smoke, noise, things like that is more important than the scale.
Okay.
Do we need to define light manufacturing?
That's part of the project.
Beg your pardon?
That's part of the project is defining light manufacturing.
Because on logic as a big building with
Right.
stands out like a pretty sore, not a sore thumb, for a sore thumb, but a pretty thumb, especially at night. But it's light manufacturing. It's electronics. Doesn't make any smell or noise.
Right. So part of one of the bullets in here is light manufacturing is a bit of a catch-all in our definitions, and it's one of the specific ones that we wanted to examine in particular to figure out what uses can fall into that category because they have a similar impact, and which things need to be broken out or what other things can be pulled in. So it's one of those categories that needs to be looked at closely.
Does the state have a definition for that? No, they don't.
No,
Okay.
that's our own special.
We'll have to invent it.
For the handout, I think got some good ideas in there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that Paul actually just pointed out to me is that the project description in particular reads that it reads a little bit like the examination of commercial uses, and that kind of consolidation is only applicable in medium scale areas. That's not necessarily the intention. These would also be, if you consolidate uses in the use table, that's applicable citywide, not just, you wouldn't have a different use table for the medium scale neighborhood district, for example.
Right, so last meeting, we were talking about how we've got a lot of redundant overlapping uses like printing facility. And I think as we're envisioning it, regardless of where that might be allowed, so that might be in the high scale mixed use or the commercial industrial or wherever, that we've got an opportunity to shorten that list and make it a lot simplified. Do you think that that's clear in here, or could we be a little bit more clear? Maybe in that first sentence to talk about, across all,
Throughout the city or something.
Citywide.
across,
Citywide.
right,
Yeah.
across all, districts that allow for commercial activity or something like
Mhm.
that.
It probably would make sense to add that, I would think.
Maybe in the
Yeah.
title, it should be commercial uses citywide and medium scale something.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And uses allowed in medium scale areas, something like that,
Mhm.
just so that we're being very clear from
Mhm.
day one that
Some of it
the
is
commercial
citywide.
uses are not, it says and, but just to be even more transparent.
So just as just in the middle of that, I added, I changed the project title to commercial uses citywide and uses allowed in medium scale areas. And I added the word citywide in the second line of the project description.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Okay.
That's. Is the timeline also would be pushed?
Would be the same,
Match what?
the
we last
same one
discussed?
that we'd
Okay.
push that out. Yep. So
Um,
again, just for the record, that would be making it January to March for drafting and April, May for public hearing.
Any other feedback on that project, George?
Related to what we
Wait.
discussed before.
Hold on, was that call? Michael is gonna go and then I'll let you go.
Just for who would we ask to be engaged in defining this project, other than us? Would we ask somebody like on Logic to help us with this, or the Lane Press at the other place? In other words, owners or tenants of the commercial districts?
I mean, I think something like the SBBA would be somebody to reach out to. A lot of those folks are members of the South Northern Business Association.
No insult to you, but they don't do much.
Oh, but I'm saying if we want to
No,
have
but the people who
outreach,
are involved, who are actually resident or have a building, have a business there, I'm assuming we would ask them to be engaged.
we certainly could. But
Economic
if your economic development could be involved, but I'm saying if you're looking for community organizations to reach out to, that would be one.
I think we feel good about that to certainly engage with some of the key businesses, South Burlington Business Association, on and others on this. I think we're, as this is our first time doing this, we don't want to limit ourselves and say we're only going to talk with these
Mhm.
groups, but with that direction, we absolutely would. And would intend to otherwise anyway, but
They're likely to come up with things that we hadn't considered too.
right. And there may be more groups than that we don't want to just say only these two.
Mhm.
Uh,
I'm sorry, Colin, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess so. One clarification. I was confused. We're looking at uses in the medium scale neighborhood, and we're looking at the light manufacturing definition. And the first bullet point of the project purpose, there's the examine the definition of uses, including light manufacturing. That reads to me like we're kind of re-examining like the entirety of the use table, which I guess I'm a little, are we doing that here, or are we only kind of re-examining portions of the massive use table here?
So I would say, Colin, that this is not necessarily that specifically the definition of light manufacturing needs work, but we are intending to look at the entire use table to consolidate different things that are currently separate that should be just consolidated into one thing, and that may include updating definitions. But we had
Okay.
specifically called out light manufacturing as kind of the biggest nut to crack in this. But yes, examination of consolidating other uses, like Paul pointed out, printing press and
Yeah.
retail copy services are two separate uses, or I don't remember if
Okay.
that's exactly how it's phrased, but looking at those sorts of things for opportunities to streamline and consolidate, which may involve changing definition.
Okay, cool. Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
When you say consulting required, you're talking about outside consulting?
Yes. Like consulting, funding, private contracting stuff.
Okay. All right. So if we're good with that, do I have a motion to approve it? With the amended timeframe?
Moved by
And-
Michael.
And the new change in the project title?
Yep.
Okay.
And description.
The one adding the word citywide to description. Yeah.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that too.
And second.
Donna gets this
You
one.
can take turn.
Donna got the second. on
Make it
that one.
up. Make it up a little.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
All right.
All right. That was unanimous. All right. We have some minutes to approve, July 30th. I talked to Kelsey earlier. I did have a question. This kind of relates to business. I was not at this meeting. But I wanted to, Kelsey, you thought maybe it was a typo.
Where instead of where?
No.
A little bit, it's a little bit more than that. It was,
So they talked, it was the folks from the pet organization were in, and they were talking about,
Oh, there it is.
yeah, it talked about, where's that paragraph? I'm sorry, did you find it, Kelsey? Where it was, it just seemed, okay, it's on page 4, the top of page 4, the second paragraph. The kennel and pet daycare are okay, but the pet grooming use is non-conforming. Is that factual? It seems crazy that we would,
I think that is not factual, but I didn't get a chance to double check it. I will
I
do that
just-
now.
to me, that when I was just looking over the minutes, I thought that seems crazy, but
Yeah, those are okay, but there'll be no brushing.
I,
That is
mean-
what was said.
that is what was said?
That is what was said.
Okay.
But
Pet
I-
grooming is allowed. And
Did it have
it may be
more to do with the
non-conforming, but
overnight-
it's what they do.
The overnight.
What's that? I'm sorry?
Maybe non-conforming, but it is what they do.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
just-
Wasn't it, didn't it have more to do with the overnight keeping of animals?
Well, that said kennel and.
that
pet
was the
daycare.
veterinary thing, Donna. That's a different thing.
Oh,
It
that's
seemed
different.
absolutely crazy that we would allow the first two and not allow that third
Right.
one, but maybe
Pet
we'll look at that from the
grooming.
table of uses.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fact that we're confused about that just goes to show
Yeah.
the necessity of this upcoming work item.
It sounds like maybe what I either said or meant to say was the inverse of that. Pet grooming is okay, but kennel and pet daycare are non-conforming, meaning they can continue to exist, but they would not be newly allowed or allowed to expand.
Okay,
Does that check out with table of
that
uses?
sounds like a great
Find pets.
thing to fix later when we get to that. Okay. I don't know how we want to, if we just want to approve the minutes as is, or
Well, you can update that.
Do we need to amend the minutes? To
So
reverse.
it's actually the inverse of what's there.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess if we just note to approve the minutes with the inverse of what is on that, in that paragraph.
Paragraph
Panel-
two on
Sure.
paragraph 2 on page 4. Yeah,
Okay,
That commercial kennel is not allowed and pet grooming is allowed.
Yep.
Yes.
However, Sue, did I say the way that it's written there?
Yes, indeed.
So this is the catch of,
okay,
it's what I said. So I would recommend, instead of that, just delete that sentence. Because minutes are not a capturing of everything, and Sue is correct that if I said it one way, we shouldn't say that I said it another
Okay.
way,
all right.
but you could delete the sentence.
You guys okay with that? I was not at the meeting. I just happened to pick up on
Hmm.
that, but if you guys are okay with that, then
I'm okay.
we
Yeah,
can.
better than putting something inaccurate in the minute.
Okay.
Right, either
Right. Yeah, all
inaccurate
right,
or
all right.
not what was
Yeah.
said, if
Okay.
that's in fact how I said it, so.
All right, so I guess I need a motion to approve the minutes with that sentence deleted.
So moved. I move to approve the minutes of July the 30th, is it?
And I would second that.
With the
With
sentence that reads,
The kennel and.
the
pet
kennel
daycare are
and
okay.
pet daycare are okay, but the pet grooming use is non-conforming, deleted.
And Donna seconded that. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I
All right, that is unanimous. Okay, folks, I believe
Next
we're at the
meeting.
end of the,
Thanks, everyone.
we are adjourned. Thank you, people.
40.
Thank you, Kyle.
thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Colin.
Thank you.
It was a little bit of perseverance. I'll be here in 2 weeks. With a little bit of perseverance.
More traveling.
Hmm?
You do more traveling.
No, I'm having